like that. I'm going to be brief. I'm a practicing architect and do a lot of institutional educational projects. And we are very interested in smart buildings and how buildings become our partners. And as we live and inhabit those, as Michael was alluding to, what is that relationship? How do the buildings influence us? How do we influence the buildings? How does all that evolve into the future as this partnership grows? I'm sitting here at the meeting with my iPad and my smartphone. I found myself checking the thermostat in my house this morning off of my iPhone because we have a wonderful little Nest thermostat in the house that as I walk in the evening, it knows that I've arrived. It can sense that I'm there. It knows what my schedule is. It can adjust the temperature. And it knows as I checked this morning that I'm out of the house. I haven't been there for a few days. It's an interesting change in dynamics about how we interrelate with our buildings, and that's just going to continue to evolve as we move into the future. When Time magazine puts on their cover smart buildings and what those buildings will become and how we interact with those, part of me goes, well, we've now jumped the shark and we're going to move on to something else. But at the same time, I think it's so entered the mainstream that it's really key to how we're going to start to move towards buildings that really are our partners and become extensions of ourselves, and how they alter what it is we can do with the energy and the resources and the thought time that we have within those spaces. So with that, there are two of my friends who are, I have to put in a brief plug also. In October, we've tried to marry, I wear another hat. I'm the president of the California Council of the AIA this year. And we're putting on a conference at the end of October, October 25th in Santa Monica called Now Next Future. And since my wife and partner Betsy is on the board of AMFO, we said, wouldn't it be wonderful to get some cross-fertilization? So I invite all of you to come to that. Herman and Lucas, who are going to be presenting in a moment, are part of that. Tom and Betsy are going to be doing some presentations at that conference as well. It's up at the Cross Campus and should be a lot of fun. I'm not going to take any more time because I think the real meat of our presentation is with Lucas and Herman, who are going to talk about the work that they're doing in looking at smart buildings and looking at smart technologies and how our buildings become our partners through Gary Technology. So, gentlemen, come on up.
Do I have a clicker here? So thank you, Brian, and thank you, Gordon, for inviting us here to present some of the work that we've been involved with in the last couple of years. My background is in architecture, so I wear multiple hats. My background is in architecture and also in technology, but I'm also a faculty member at the California College of Arts, where I teach architecture students. And so some of the work that I thought I'd present today comes from my teaching at UCLA IDEAS campus. And so a lot of the focus will be on critters and zombies as well. And by that I mean critters, I mean everyday objects, right? So podium, objects like this, that are smart objects. And as Brian was alluding to today, we start to see things like Nest thermostat and so on that provide information. And by zombies, I mean my architecture students. So those of you that have gone through architecture school can sympathize with these students. Oftentimes they're walking zombies. As part of this presentation, I kind of want to talk about living labs. And from my experience, PlaceLab specifically at MIT as a case study for this idea of living labs, built environment as a new living lab. So proposing moving away from traditional laboratories, and with these new technologies, built environment itself can become a laboratory. And talk about the work we've been doing at IDEA Studio, some of the proposals that the students have been working on, and Lucas will talk about next steps through partnerships. So one of my goals here today, though my abstract didn't talk about neuroscience specifically, I'm hoping that we can build collaborations with neuroscientists today. So with that, I'd like to start with this quote here. Imagine a world where every point in space has the potential to be a sensor and display. You walk into the room, automatically adjusts itself and preferred temperature. Lights turn on just how you like it, and with the wave of the hand, the shades adjust to allow the right amount of lighting for your specific activity, right? So this was probably something that was futuristic not too long ago. But today, this, as you know, with new technologies like Nest, this is kind of the normal world that we live in today. So this has also been a study by many universities and other organizations. I mentioned the Living Laboratory, which is really a focus for ubiquitous computing research, which are naturalistic environments instrumental with sensing and observational technology used for experimental evaluation. So this PlaceLab is kind of a specific instance of a living laboratory at MIT, and again from my experience at House N. So it was a project that was started by Kent Larson and Stephen Intil of House N, and opened in July of 2004, so not very long ago, right, only 10 years ago, in an urban neighborhood in Cambridge. Was really driven by volunteer research participants who love this idea of the PlaceLab and lived in the PlaceLab for a duration of the time, really treating it as a temporary home. While meanwhile, there's a detailed description of their activities being recorded by sensing devices integrated into the fabric of the architecture itself. So here's kind of a small diagram of this space, this apartment, which these volunteers would live in for a duration of time. And the entire apartment was equipped with multiple sensors that allowed us to collect information on type of uses and activities throughout the spaces. So for instance, this kitchen, we could understand how many times the hot water was used or the cold water was used, how many times somebody would open up a cabinet. And we had built-in video cameras and audio recording devices that allow us to capture the information and try to understand and make this data available to other researchers, how humans or people, volunteers that lived in spaces use these spaces specifically. Just consisted of a 1,000 square feet apartment, a living room, dining room, kitchen, small office, bedroom, full bath, and half bath, which really was made up of 15 prefabricated, reconfigurable cabinetry components, and each again contain a microcontroller, addressable speaker, and a network of 30 sensors. So the goal here was to put as many sensors as we could into this environment and not focus on a specific sensor, a specific data collection type, but be able to really tell the story through a number of sensors built into the environment. So these participants were selected by questionnaires and interviews and ranged from the age of 36 and 60 years old, and were each just compensated $25 per day, right, for their participation. But they really expressed a primary reason for participating was they had the belief that this research would yield long-term social and scientific benefits. So this is kind of an example of a floor plan of the layout of this space and some of the images that were captured. So again, we had cameras, microcontrollers that allowed us to see into these people's everyday lives, and collect their audio samples and again their activities by putting sensors directly into the hardware that they were using. So this controlled laboratory study really allowed the installation of these dense sensor networks and useful for study of the behavior and development of new context-aware algorithms. So that's part of the motivation here. But simulated rooms or short stays severely constrained behavior variability, right? People were being moved out of their own homes and into these laboratory spaces. So it's kind of, we'll see one of the criticisms of this laboratory. But some of the main goals for the PlaceLab was designed with ubiquity of sensing technologies as a primary goal, again, to embed as many sensors into this space, to collect as much data as we could about the people inhabiting this space, really focus on the quantity and ubiquity of the sensing rather than the quality of a particular sensor. Many of the previous studies had focused on a specific sensor and not kind of all overall information. And the last goal was to create a system that would provide single unified synchronization of this living lab data sets in a format that could be readily provided to other researchers interested in this space. So, you know, this collection of the data sets really allowed for new areas of investigation of human behavior, but one of the common criticism, again, was that people were being removed out of their own homes into these temporary spaces, really reducing the complexity and variability of the home environment, which had a corresponding effect on particular behavior. But the study itself was still kind of rich enough to be able to give us insight into how humans use their particular living spaces. So despite some of the living limitations, this lab still allowed for more natural behavioral observations and data collection of these everyday activities such as cooking, socializing, sleeping, cleaning, and working from the home, and relaxing them that can be obtained from short, that couldn't be obtained from short laboratory visits. So there's some richness still allowed by these spaces that you couldn't get from short laboratory visits. So these data sets have been published on the web, and there are a number of projects, including projects at Georgia Tech, MIT, that follow similar scenarios, and are available for you guys to download and do research on. But what I'm really here to talk about is what is the next living lab for us, right? So today there are over 12.5 billion devices connected to the web, and it's expected that 25 billion will be connected by 2015, and 50 billion by 2020. So what does that mean? That's not just our smartphones and mobile technologies. We're talking about everyday objects like this podium, right? The mention of creatures, the tables, the chairs. These devices, objects will be connected onto the web and providing data for us that really give us insight into how people use these spaces. And we're finding devices being embedded in many places, in cars, appliances, cameras, roads, pipelines, medicine, even livestock. So we're really getting insight. And the lab is really moving away from this living lab idea and more into the built environment. So our world is becoming interconnected. Right? And I like this image. I put it in here because it really reminded me of what we've been talking about here is brain activity. Right? It kind of reminds me of this image of the brain and using an MRI. But what is the brain of the built world? What does that look like? What is the brain of our buildings and future spaces that we design? Nobody's invented the MRI of that system, or the Facebook that allows us to tap into that information, or the YouTube that allows us to create streams to be able to use for informing design. So this has been kind of an area of research that has been focused at UCLA through Frank Gehry's and Gehry Tech Super Studio. This campus is really dedicated to this cross-disciplinary area of research and collaboration among students, faculty, and industry partners, which really question and challenge and tries to expand on the future of architectural and urban design practice. So for those you non-architects in the room, who is Gehry Tech? Gehry Tech is an AEC tech company created for research and development out of Gehry Partners. Since its formation in 2002, the firm has grown an international leader in technology and driven project delivery with offices around the world. So it's really an extension of Frank Gehry's design office. So across the street from Gehry Tech is IDEAS campus in Playa Vista. And this is our main place, our main lab for research. And interesting about this space is that historically used to be the hangar for the spruce spruce, right? So it's kind of a space that's been known for innovation, and there's this kind of culture that's created in Playa Vista, where Howard Hughes developed the first full wooden plane out of this space. So it's kind of a exciting space to work in. And in this space, we have a number of studios that students are involved with. This is our studio, Frank Gehry studio, inside of one of these hangars, in which we are able to kind of explore these new technologies and this idea of what we call today we call the Internet of Things, and kind of getting into some pedagogy. We teach students to really understand these technologies by building their own technologies, right? Building their own systems. So we teach things like circuit building. So students use this Arduino platform to experiment with. Another technology is kind of leap motion sensor. How do we use gestural technology to be able to control these smart environments? Or something like using the retina also to be able to control environments and use gestures in kind of a different way. So lastly, before I give it over to Lucas, talk about how this is being applied in practice. We're focusing on things like home automation, again, some more gestural technologies, and developing new typologies for architecture. So, you know, in the 60s with the work of archigram, these were kind of new ideas then about being able to wear your building essentially as a dress. And our students kind of taken that work and used, you know, principles learned from these new technologies on what that means for today's world, and be able to prototype some of these skins using very low-tech technology. So that's kind of a pretty exciting space for us. So with that, Lucas, if you want to talk a little bit about how we're taking these lessons learned in academia and really exciting for us, looking to push it into practice.
Thank you, German. So actually the good news is we have labs across the world, right? I mean, that's the exciting thing about architecture is we're building buildings. I'm an architect by training. Through working at GT, I've been fortunate enough to travel to many construction sites to see all the challenges that we face. And so what we would like to do here today is solicit partnership. That's something that we really value working through our day-to-day. We partner with other designers, with contractors, and more we'd love to see new partnerships grow through the scientific community. We just were up having a discussion with the folks running one of the quantum computers here in California, so that's exciting for us. And one of the major challenges that we have, I mean, there's so many to talk about within the design and construction industry, but to be specific, construction waste is actually a large sort of thorn in the side of our clients. And architects have an opportunity to help take a leadership role in that, at least through partnership with contractors, with others within the field. And so we've done that. We partnered with a company called Trimble to look at all these critters or these little devices that German was talking about, but really at a different scale, right? So, you know, to look at the term that was used earlier was neuromorphic architecture, right? So what if the building has a brain? Well, we see a construction site as a temporary organization of many brains consisting of both, you know, human brains and then also many devices. And so we're looking for partners both, like I said, within the scientific community and also within the hardware and construction community to really understand what are the drivers behind the problem of waste among other problems, and what we can do through sort of smart design and smart practice to be able to create a positive feedback loop where we can interact with all the devices on site and sort of make that a reduced problem from our perspective. And then also, as mentioned earlier, the Now Next Future Conference, October 24th and 25th, up in Santa Monica. And with that, we thank you.